I'm standing here in front of Tel Safi, the pure mound in Arabic, maybe because of the white cliffs that can be seen from almost every side of it, soft limestone. This mound that has been excavated for the last 30 years already is identified with Gat of the Philistines, the hometown of Goliath, the Philistine giant that David killed in the valley of Elah. Behind me you can see the invitation sign to the national park of Gat, and you can see the image of two Philistine warriors that their image here is inspired from the famous depiction of the battle of Ramses III, the pharaoh, the Egyptian pharaoh, that fought against the Sea People in the early 12th century BCE. There, the Sea People, amongst them the Philistines, are depicted as, some of them as the warriors that you see behind me, with a very special headdress looking like feathers, and also very typical straight swords. Gat of the Philistines was one of the major Philistine settlements here in the southern coast of the land of Israel that eventually was named after them, the Philistines. Also, the term that everybody uses until today, Palestine, is also derived from the ancient Philistines that used to live here, the arch enemies of the Israelites, the tribes of Israel in the time of Samuel, Saul, and David. So I invite you now to join me, and let's climb on the mound and look what awaits to us from up there. Then David arose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of this one as they danced, saying, 'You see the man behaving as a madman? Why do you bring him to me? Do I lack madmen, that you have brought this one to act the madman in my presence? Shall this one come into my house?'" This is the description of the first time when David, after he saw that Saul is running after him everywhere, and all the loyal men, even in Judah, in his tribe, are handing him over and giving the information to Saul, eventually decides to leave the Israelite territory and to go to the most, or the greatest enemy of them, the Philistines. And he is coming to the nearest town of the Philistines, the place we are standing now. We are now on Tel Safi. This is the Arabic name of the site that in the last 30 years was extensively excavated and identified as Gat of the Philistines, one of the 5 city-states in the territory of Philistia, which is right behind us, and also the hometown of Goliath, the fearful giant that David killed in the battle in the valley of Elah. Gat is situated here in a strategic location, right at the meeting point between the lowlands, which are in front of us to the east, and the coastal plain, the southern coastal plain of Israel, which is known also as the land of the Philistines or Philistia. Here on the shore are located 3 of the 5 Philistine cities: Gaza in the south, Ashkelon, and Ashdod in the north. Inland, the 2 other city-states, Ekron, which is north of us, identified in
Tel El Mikne, and Tel Esafi, Gat of the Philistines. Because it is located in a very fertile area, which can be seen around us even today in modern times, all the fields that are cultivated, all the natural forests, because of the fact that there is enough rainfall in the wintertime to fill the water cisterns, but especially because of its height, the fact that you can defend this hill, and most important, that we are so close to the international road that connected Africa and Egypt, Mesopotamia, what the Romans called the Via Maris, the road of the sea. The course of this historical road can be seen even today in modern times, because behind us we can see road number 6 in the modern state of Israel, the road which is cutting the country from the Negev until the Galilee in the north, and actually is based on the historical road, the Via Maris of the ancient times. So the fact that this town, which was already developed here during the Canaanite period, namely the early bronze, the middle bronze, and the late bronze, later on was taken and conquered by the Philistine who settled here, but because of its location, the qualities of its location, it became a very prominent urban center in ancient times. Even the Crusaders in the 12th century, when they laid siege on Ashkelon, the Muslim city in the southern coast, they decided to fortify this hill, which is controlling one of the main roads which leads to Ashkelon in the southwest of us. In the late Bronze Age, in the second half of the 13th century BCE, we see the beginning of the collapse of all the structure, the geopolitical structure of the eastern part of the Mediterranean, which finally came to an end in the late 11th century, in the transition between the late Bronze Age and the early Iron Age. One of the outcomes of this turmoil, which ended with the collapse of the great powers like the Hittites, Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon, was the appearance of new people, new nations. Maybe the most famous and known, of course, are the people of Israel, the tribes of Israel who started to settle down in this area in the 12th century and 11th century BCE. And from the Aegean world, from Crete, from Cyprus, we see newcomers, maybe the refugees of the collapse of the great Mycenaean culture, the late Bronze culture of the Aegean world. After about 50 years of investigation and research, especially the excavations that were held in the major Philistine city-states, like here in Tel Esafi, Gat, we know that the material culture that the people that the Egyptian called the sea people, among them also the Philistines, were actually coming from this area of the Aegean islands and what was before the Mycenaean culture. The Philistines are bringing with them their pottery, their artistic traditions, and even their diet. Today we know that the first time when the European pork appears here in this part of the world is in the Philistine sites, meaning that with their immigration by sea and by land, as we know from the very famous depiction in Medinat Habu in Egypt, when the Pharaoh Ramses III actually is describing this invasion of the people that are coming from the sea, what we call today the sea people, and amongst them also the Philistines, which have a particular dress, particular weapons, and even their maritime vessels look different from those of the Egyptians. This migration of people came by land and by sea, and we're talking not only about warriors, or some even today call them even a kind of pirates that invaded into the shores, but also we see together with them also civilian population, women and children coming with wagons that are taken by bulls. So eventually the Philistines are settling down here, and they take the southern part of the coast of Israel, what we call Philistia, and in a very interesting process we see how they intermingled in the local population. So very quickly we see that the pottery traditions, the ware that they brought with them from their homelands actually is mixed with the local pottery, and we get a kind of a fusion between the two. Later on, in the 8th and the 7th century, we see that the assimilation is almost complete, because they also adopt the local writing, the local alphabet, or the script, which is very similar to Paleo-Hebrew. And also we see that their names are names that we can identify as Semitic names. But in the beginning, in this early part, when they actually invade and settle down, we see their foreign traditions also reflected in the Bible. For example, the name of the local king in the story of David, Achish, which is also documented later in Neo-Assyrian records as Ikausu. So maybe the name should be read Achaios or Achaios, maybe very similar to the Achaeans from the Greek world, is for sure a foreign introduction. Also the name Goliath, remember he was born here in Gath of the Philistines, is also seems to be a foreign name. Even the biblical term which describes the rulers of the Philistines, Sranim, is there is an idea, a theory which sounds very logical to identify this biblical term with the Greek word tyrannos, which means a ruler. So we see a lot of evidence which show that the origin of the Philistines is really from that Aegean place. I'm sitting here in one of the excavated areas on Tel El-Safi, Gath of the Philistines, that was excavated here a few years ago by the expedition that has been working here for the last 30 years, led by Professor Aaron Meir from the Bar Ilan University. And right here we can see remains of dwellings that belong of the Philistine city that thrived here until the second half of the 9th century BCE, before it was destroyed by the Arameans. So the Philistines are settling here in this area of the southern coastal plain of the land of Israel, which was named after them, Philistia. And here in one of the two inland cities, Gath, this is where David, after he realized that he cannot stay anymore, even in the territory of his tribe, because the men from Judah are still informing, giving information about his location to Saul, who persuades him everywhere. So eventually he decides to come here to the big enemy of Saul and the Israelites, to the hometown of Goliath, the Philistine giant and hero that he killed in battle, and he comes to Achish, king of Gath. And as we read, when the Philistines realized who is among them, the hero of the Israelites, the one that the women of Israel sang about him, he has slain the 10,000s, he now understands that he's really in great danger. And therefore he makes himself appearing as a madman, and therefore Achish, the king of Gath, decides to get rid of him, saying, I have enough madmen in my court, I don't need another one. We know from the Philistines, the Philistine king name, Achish, which is also documented in Neo-Assyrian records as Ikausu, that his name probably was something like Akayush, which is something which resembles maybe the Achens, the people that we know from the Aegean world. Also, the material culture that was excavated in Tel Safi proves that the origin of the people that settled here is from that part of the world, the islands of the Aegean Sea, maybe remnants of the great Mycenaean culture, the civilization that thrived in the area of Greece and the islands in the late Bronze Age. The Philistines also introduced here the European pork, which was not known in this area before their arrival, and therefore archaeologists find for the first time bones of the European pork in the Philistine city-states, and that also shows to us the great difference between them and the local population. When I say local, I mean Semitic population, Israelites, Canaanites, and other. It is interesting also to see that in the Bible, the only nation which is named as Arelim, which means in Hebrew, the ones that are not circumcised, are the Philistines, meaning that this custom was also something that was foreign to the local population, and therefore they were very, very strange. One of the stories about the uncircumcised is, of course, when Saul decides to give his hero David, his champion, one of his daughters. In the beginning, the plan to give was to give the elder one, Meirav, but later on it was Michal, which eventually married with David. But Saul, who already has the intentions to get rid of David because of his success, and he envies him, he sends him to an impossible mission. In this case, David, maybe as Tom Cruise of his period, has to go to the Philistines and to bring back 100 pieces of the uncircumcised organs of the Philistines. David is succeeding much more, and eventually he brings back the double amount. So he comes back with 200 of them. So again, we see another thing that shows the big difference between the Philistines and the Israelites. But when David, again, when he doesn't have any other choice, he decides to turn to the other side, and eventually he tries to find refuge at the court of Achish, king of Gath, but that also is in vain. And for that reason, eventually he will go and flee into the desert to try and find shelters in the strongholds of the desert, meaning the cliffs of the Judean desert that we're going to meet later in our next episode. Anyway, Gath of the Philistine is going to play a key role also later, because eventually David is going to find refuge and join the enemies of Israel, the Philistines, and he's going to be here. The Philistines are going to give him even the town of Ziklag, where he's going to live and settle down and be there, even in the time when the decisive battle between the Philistines and Saul, the battle that took place on the foothill of Mount Gilboa in the north, will take place. David was supposed to participate together with his men. At that point already he has 600 of them, and eventually the Philistines still don't trust him, and they have the leaders of the Philistines, they tell Achish, the king of Gath, that there is the danger that David eventually is going to turn over and support their enemies, the Israelites, and therefore they decide to leave him here in this area, in Ziklag. And this is very interesting. I mean, this is another way of the biblical text to show that actually David never really turned to the other side and betrayed his kinmen in the Israelites and in Judea. And eventually he stayed loyal to them. In the time when the Philistines were, the Philistine army went to the north to fight the army of King Saul, David is actually taking the opportunity to get rid of all the enemies, the local enemies of the Judean settlements, the Judean villages and towns in the area of the lowlands, all kinds of Bedouins, of Amalekites, and so on. And he attacks them and actually brings their spoil to his kinmen. So again, the text is really stressing the fact that David never betrayed his men, and part of him actually forming his supporting loyals that are going to be with him in the next phase of his career. Actually, he is gathering them here in this area when he actually saves the local population and becomes more and more popular. Another interesting thing that we see here is that eventually David is going to form his most loyal special unit out of the Keretite and the Peletite. Peletite may be Philistines. It means that when he was here in Philistia, among the Philistines, he also gathered loyal people, a kind of foreign mercenaries that eventually are going to become the backbone of his army and part of his, what we can say, his foreign bodyguard that were completely relied upon him and became the famous Keretite and Peletite unit in his court.